Like the, David Seymour's bill that create this kind of division and dissent and them and us and embolden.
We don't want that in New Zealand.
Asses like Destiny Church to do what they do.
It's very easy, and this is a conversation I have with many other world leaders. Like everyone is grumpy, right? Everyone is anxious. We're living in an age of massive disruption, and people are feeling it, and they're frustrated. And you're seeing it with much shorter political cycles. But we have a choice in New Zealand. Do we want to go down the road that we've seen in Western Europe and North America? We get very polarised, and we go to our corners, and we hang out with the same people, have the same views, and we're in our own echo chambers on all sides of any debate? Or do we actually choose to actually work together and try and bind a way and find a way forward together? Because we're seeing what's happened in global politics and everywhere, and we're seeing it here as well. And there's rising level of tension and frustration, and I get that. But we're not. You can't. Everyone on each side is adamant that they're right and the other side's wrong. And unless, as my mum used to say to me as a little boy, you've got to walk across the room, find someone different from you, and actually have an engaged debate that isn't personal with all the invective that goes with it, and actually debate the issue, not the individual. And that is about us collectively as leaders actually modelling that out. And that's why I keep saying I ask all political leaders to watch their rhetoric, and actually, because it's easy to go fire up a bunch of people and make them angry. Anyone can do that.
In Parliament, there's so much time wasted on petty point scoring, like Aotearoa New Zealand, and
Yeah, well, I'm telling you, the New Zealand people want this government and their political leaders focused on the issues that matter to them, and that is why I keep saying growth this year. That's what's going to help.
Okay.
Law and order.
Okay.
And I apologize for being the quantitative poli-sci academic, so hence the slides. But I just want to say I'm not going to be anywhere near as wide-ranging as Anne. I'm focusing strictly on the West. That's Western Europe, North America, Australasia, and also only on right-wing populism, not on left-wing populism. I think there's a really important frame for this, which is the global demographic revolution, which is really about the unevenness in global population trends around the world. So 97% of the world's population growth is taking place in the global south, the tropical belt, which is obviously non-European, but also highly religious, and the source of most of the immigration present and future for the West. What that means is a dramatic shift in the ethnic and religious composition of Western societies. And this is ultimately what I'm going to be arguing is behind the rise of right-wing populism. If the West was like Japan or Korea, we wouldn't have right-wing populism, pure and simple. It is about immigration and ethnic change. Those changes are going to be dramatic. Already we know in the US, the shift from a population that was about 85% non-Hispanic white in 1960 to what is projected to be only 50% of the population non-Hispanic white in 2050. That same process is occurring in New Zealand and Canada, both of which will also become majority-minority around 2050. Canada, where I'm from, actually has you can look at the dramatic, there was a projection by Statistics Canada demographers that showed in the year 2006, the country was about 80% European origin, 20% non-European. 100 years later, in 2106, those proportions will be roughly reversed. Now, that's not everywhere is going to move as fast as Canada, but what David Coleman, the demographer, calls the third demographic transition towards this complete ethnic transformation of Western societies, I believe is the backdrop for what we're seeing in Western, not necessarily the East, which we can come to later, although I can talk about that, but this is why we're seeing right-wing populism in the West. And immigration is very much a symbolic lightning rod issue because it unsettles the identity of ethnic majority groups and also people who are attached to the nation, but part of their national identity is the ethnic composition, the historic or the ethnic composition they've grown up with.
I think one of the key things is that when you look at what's happening around the world at the moment, there is genuine interest in the role of the media in societies like our own. If we take the Brexit example, if we take Mr. Trump for example, what I think has begun to happen is that people are realising that one of the many things that worries them is that trend towards people living in a bubble, because mainly commercial media, driven by the need to deliver an advertiser's audience to them, moves off constantly to find that audience, to seal it off and bring it to the advertiser. So in many cases, we're increasingly now confronted by people who never talk to each other, who never hear about each other, who are not part of some kind of general discussion. They're talking to the people who agree with them. And if we look at what's happened in the US, I think we would agree that's exactly one of the problems that is faced now in the US. People are listening to CNN and to test Fox. They're listening to Fox and to test CNN. So they don't actually listen to each other for very long. Now, the notion that we move into those bubbles, I guess, is at the heart of why you want quality public broadcasting. Because at the heart of public broadcasting is the notion of national identity and of the building of a community of people who may well be diverse and different, but hear about each other, who get to know what each other's stories might be, and as a result begin to have a process of building a sense that yes, we're different, but we share common values, we understand each other, we know what you're on about. You may well be a Muslim, I may be a Christian, but I understand what you're doing. I'm not unfamiliar with you, and I can live in the same society, and we can share some things, we can have a national identity, we can be here together. That kind of question of identity and that question of community has unfortunately been left to people like Nigel Farage around the world, or the wonderful Boris, for example, who have argued that they're the only people who can talk about these kinds of issues, when really people who want to live in a progressive society where people do have that sense of community and tolerance that runs side by side, those people need to take that debate back. And one of the ways of doing that is through public broadcasting. I think one of the ways to popularise this debate at the moment is to get into the mainstream of debate amongst New Zealanders that we do need to live together. We do need a way of doing that, and public broadcasting, wherever it may be, is a way of doing that.
But for today, my mind is focused squarely on issues that are dominating the international agenda and have done so for some time. Whatever the news headline, the underlying theme in global politics seems to be the same: that the rules have changed, economically and politically. For those of us who identify ourselves as being part of the progressive movement, there is no question that this unsettled environment has led to challenging questions from the public and voters, and challenging political outcomes in debates, elections, and referenda. This is not new. A decade ago, as the president of the International Union of Socialist Youth, I visited the United Nations in New York for a gathering of the Socialist International. Present were leaders like Georgios Papandreou, who at the time was leader of the opposition, and Joseph Stiglitz. We were there to discuss the emerging financial crisis. At the time, we were staring down the barrel of a hugely unsettled period for countries and their citizens, and there was a rallying cry for progressive nations and their governments to respond. Some would argue that that response never came. More than a decade later, we continue to face the challenges of what I would characterise as a sense of global uncertainty. Globalisation, of course, isn't new. In New Zealand, we have grappled with this issue and its impact for decades, but the sense of insecurity seems to have only strengthened over the years. The benefits from globalisation have been distributed disproportionately to the few. There is a growing sense that ordinary people are working harder just to stay in exactly the same place. Add to that rapid technological change, where even in a country as small as New Zealand, the workforce faces the prospect that more than 45% of jobs will no longer exist or will be completely replaced in just 2 decades, and it is little wonder that that sense of insecurity has grown. Now, as politicians, we have choices. Choices in how we respond to this growing but justifiable dissatisfaction. We can offer a message of hope, or we can offer a message of fear. People need security. They need to hear from their political leaders that we anticipate that change, that we have a plan, that we understand their need for job security, that we understand their need for housing security, and that we understand the need for hope for the next generation so that they too can have the future that their parents had, if not a better one. And if we do none of these things, we leave a vacuum for fear and for populism. Now, the challenge for progressive and inclusive movements, from my perspective, lies in delivering that sense of security whilst also staying true to the notion of open borders, fair trade, international responsibility, and other principles that have guided a country like New Zealand for a number of years.